Good morning, everyone, to this webinar, which is focused on Climate-ADAPT and specifically on its renewed adaptation support tool, including presentation and illustration of a practical example how it can be used in decision-making and planning at the national level. I'm Silvia Medri. I'm a scientific manager at CMCC, who is hosting this webinar, but the webinar is organized together with the European Environment Agency in the framework of the ETC-CCA, that stands for European Topic Center on Climate Change Impacts, Vulnerability and Adaptation, which is a project funded by the European Environment Agency that CMCC coordinates. I'd like just to give you some introductory words on CMCC, as usual, and on this ETC-CCA project that I personally coordinate. Then I will leave the floor to Kati Mattern from the agency, who will be moderating the webinar, and then to Markus Leitner from Environment Agency Austria, also partner of ETC-CCA, and to Detelina Petrova from Ministry of Environment from Bulgaria. So, as most of you, I think, already know, the Euro-Mediterranean Center on Climate Change, shortly CMCC, is a non-profit research organization working on a wide range of climate change related topics in the framework of sustainable development and transition toward a climate neutral and resilient society. Including investigating in depth our climate system and its interactions with society, including the economic aspects. We are organized in form of a network of offices throughout Italy. I'm from Bologna. And we are structured in form of research divisions that cover a range of relevant topics: climate simulation and predictions, risk assessment and adaptation strategies, economic analysis of climate impacts and policies, ocean modeling and data simulation, climate change impacts and adaptation on forest, agriculture, and ecosystem services, regional models and geohydrological impacts, and sustainable health modeling economics. All of that supported by an advanced scientific computing center and division. Our main topics, more broadly, cover future Earth, the oceans, our cities and coasts, energy, jobs and growth, poverty and migrations, water, foods and land use, social inequalities, and the global policy. We also provide support to. I think you should know that CMCC is very active also in a range of outreach and dissemination activities, including conferences, education and training courses, lots of peer-reviewed and beyond publications, and communication through a wide range of channels, including social media. As far as the ETC-CCA is concerned, this is a project supporting the European Environment Agency in providing on their end support to the policy making at the EU level. Especially we support the EA. No, sorry, this was about the consortium. So Indeed, we are a consortium of 15 partners from 10 European countries. And as I was saying, we contribute to the EEA strategic objective in this area of supporting and informing policy development and implementation in the area of climate change adaptation, with the main supported policy process at the EU level being the one related to the EU climate change adaptation strategy. However, as climate change adaptation is cross-cutting and requires mainstreaming in a range of sectoral policies, we also indirectly support these processes too. And how we do that? We do that by supporting the EEA in the production of independent, reliable, and actionable knowledge. For example, in the form of thematic and assessment reports, indicators, and information systems, and especially Climate-ADAPT that we will be talking about today. Said that, I'd like just to remind all the participants that you will be able to post any question during the presentations whenever you want. The questions will be collected by the moderator at the end of the meeting, and we will be able to reply live to some of them. Said that, please remember also that the webinar will be recorded, and that at the end you will find the registration on the CMCC YouTube channel. Thanks a lot, and I would just promptly give the floor to Kati Mattern. Here you are.
I hope you can hear me and you can see my screen. Thank you, Silvia. Thank you for introducing me and giving the welcome for our webinar today. I'm Kati Mattern from the European Environment Agency, and I'm the moderator of this webinar. I took over this position as the Climate-ADAPT expert from José Ramón Picatoste, who was moderating the previous webinar. I would like to give all of you a warm welcome. I'm very glad to see so many people here. We have 330 participants from Europe and also from out of Europe and from different backgrounds, and I give you a very warm welcome. I would like to briefly introduce Climate-ADAPT to the persons who don't know it yet. Climate-ADAPT was launched in 2012, and it is jointly managed by the European Commission and the European Environment Agency and supported by the Topic Center. It aims to support organizations who prepare and implement adaptation policies and actions. And this is reflected in its content. It provides in a very structured way web content that is accessible from the main bar. It covers policy information at EU levels, at countries, transnational regions and cities levels, and it provides a wide variety of tools, knowledge and guidance, and as well network functionality. And it also shows news and events to stay up to date with what is happening at EU level, in the European Union on adaptation. Climate-ADAPT had a specific role to play in the EU adaptation strategy, which was published in 2013, and it was made to support decision making at all levels on adaptation, at all governance levels on adaptation in Europe. And so far, the Climate-ADAPT evaluation has shown that it fulfilled its role in two ways. On one hand, it was providing knowledge according to the evolving knowledge needs, because countries and others were were developing from the first levels of adaptation, preparing the ground and developing strategies towards implementing them and evaluating the success of those strategies. And secondly, Climate-ADAPT also succeeded to collect the information that was coming, the increasing amount of information and knowledge that was coming from research projects and live projects in a very meaningful way. So that was the previous strategy, the current strategy, and the role of Climate-ADAPT. But we all know there are more challenges ahead of us. We know that climate change does not stop, and we have even more challenges, and they become more systemic if we look at the biodiversity losses at global levels and the current corona pandemic. And the policy at various levels is reflecting those challenges. We know that in the UNFCCC framework agreement, convention, adaptation became a much more important role, and also in other policy frameworks. And the EU was also reacting on that. We have now it's coming up the climate law, and we have the EU governance regulation, where we will see that how the EU and the member states are reporting their actions towards our binding climate mitigation and adaptation goals, which are laid down in the climate law. And also we have at EU levels funding programs that react on that role, like LIFE on Copernicus, Horizon 2020, and the new research programs, and also the regional development funds. The EU is still vulnerable to climate impacts within and outside the EU and its borders, and adaptation needs have intensified and diversified since 2013. And Europe also has to play a more important role in the global policy context. And thus there is a need for a new adaptation strategy with reinforced action and additional priorities. We have seen that the EU has already set up a public consultation for the new EU adaptation strategy, which will be published in 2021. And as part of that, there was already a blueprint and a vision shown how the new strategy could look like. And there will be continued and expand of the existing work strands, but also already new strands and building blocks are suggested where the EU should do more to be better prepared and to increase the resilience of Europe. That means, for example, more and better data. And in all these actions, Climate-ADAPT has to play a role. It will be one of the main vehicles to implement a new strategy. We also need deeper knowledge and faster development of solutions, closing the protection gap, preventing damage to infrastructures. And for all those actions, we are preparing already Climate-ADAPT activities. I would like to make you aware we are now in the 8th Climate-ADAPT webinar, but there had been more webinars in the past, and there will be more webinars in the future. With those webinars, we aim to explain our platform features. I would like to encourage our providers and more providers to share their knowledge through Climate-ADAPT. And this is a very particular aim we have to even increase the effect of Climate-ADAPT. And I would like to make you aware that you can go to those recordings and presentations to have a look if you have specific need for further information. Why are we talking about the adaptation support tool in this webinar today, in the 8th one? We have seen in the Climate-ADAPT evaluation in 2017 that the adaptation support tool was one of the most used features of Climate-ADAPT. And that's why the EEA has continued to invest its funds and capacities into further developing the adaptation support tool and also the topic center. And we have seen that this paid off, and the adaptation support tool is still one of the most used features if you look at the use figures of the first half of 2020. So we can clearly see this here. And that's why we are presenting this today. And Markus Leitner will go into more detail. I just wanted to make you aware where you can access the adaptation support tool. You can find it under the Knowledge tab in the main menu bar, and also it is on display in the main body of the landing page of Climate-ADAPT, of the homepage on the right side. So with this short introduction to Climate-ADAPT and to the broader policy context, I would like to hand over to the respective ETC expert Markus Leitner from the UBA Austria, the Austrian Environment Agency. He has led the further development and update of the adaptation support tool. So Markus, the floor is yours. And I will change presentation now.
Yeah, thank you very much, Kati, for this nice introduction. And dear ladies and gentlemen, it's a pleasure from my side. I'm Markus Leitner. I'm with the Environment Agency Austria, and I'm supporting the European Topic Center on Climate Change Adaptation. And what I'm going to present to you now is actually the adaptation support tool, but especially its further development that we did in the course of this year, and also the new features and the further progressing on that tool, especially because of experiences in EEA member countries in Europe. Why did we do actually this adaptation support tool? And actually it comes, it was developed in line or in parallel with the EU adaptation strategy in order to support national level actors to prepare for, develop, implement, monitor, and also evaluate national adaptation strategies and adaptation plans or action plans. The aim at that time was to support the policymakers, but especially the coordinators on the national level to do that. And the main aim was, of course, to on the one hand avoid or reduce the negative impacts coming already from the current climate and future climate and climate risks, but also to seize the opportunities that might arise. The added value or the additional one is that it also aims to support subnational level actors and also transnational actors to prepare strategies and action plans. And what you have from the AST, it links and connects to diverse resources and different other tools on climate change adaptation. For the city level itself, you have the Urban Adaptation Support Tool, and that helps especially actors on the urban and city level scale to prepare for climate change adaptation on the city level. How is it set up? It should support or aims at supporting the key features or key steps, as we call them, in adaptation policy processes, and it builds especially on the experience of different European countries in general. So lots of lessons learned are now included in the adaptation support tool. The landing page that you will see when you click on the link that's provided here on this slide, but that's also put into the chat, is this here. So it starts with how the adaptation support tool is being set up and how you can get started. And what you see on the left upper side is already are those 6 steps of the adaptation support tool. And just briefly mentioning it, if you look into those different steps, doesn't mean that you need to go from step 1 to 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. It also means that you can access different steps, of course, depending on how far your adaptation policymaking process has developed. And what you see here is, so in step 1, preparing the ground for adaptation, it's about setting up your governance structure, setting up your coordination body, raising awareness, starting in raising awareness among different sector actors. On step 2, which is about assessing climate risks and vulnerabilities, it supports you in the ways how to compile your risk assessment, how to assess current risks, but also the risk assessment of future climate scenarios and their impacts on different sectors or, for example, regions. In step 3, you have a set of adaptation options or different adaptation measures that you can look at and also get an idea about the diversity of adaptation options. You also have adaptation options and good practices on Climate-ADAPT available, and it also links there. In step 4, it's about assessing those adaptation options. You can use different methodologies, like, for example, multi-criteria analysis or cost-benefit analysis in assessing the adaptation options that are of relevance for your strategy and adaptation plan. And on step 5, it's about the implementation of adaptation, which is about, for example, mainstreaming in other sectors, the governance among different governance levels, be it vertical or horizontal coordination. And in the end, you have step 6, which might not be a step in itself, but it's about the monitoring and evaluation. So already right at the beginning of step 1, it's relevant to think about the way how you're going to monitor, how you're going to measure against your different adaptation goals or sectorial goals. So this is something that actually you need to look at along the whole adaptation policy cycle. What is actually new in these adaptation support tools? Because I can imagine that some of you are already familiar and used it for different purposes. But what is new is that we revised the text, we revised structure and titles, but we also made it more concrete to different target groups and the stakeholder needs. We also had a stakeholder questionnaire in advance to have it more targeted to stakeholder needs. We increased the linkages to different other portals, be them on the European, the global, or the transnational scale, but also to sub-national portals. And we strongly improved or really did an in-depth update about step 2, the assessing of climate risks and vulnerabilities, to have it closer to the methodology used in the 5th assessment report, but it's very similar in the AR6. And also to recent developments on the European scale. Just think about the Copernicus climate change services and how you can use those services to help your risk and vulnerability assessment. What else is new? We also increased the linkages to other global agreements. So besides the Paris Agreement, also to the Sustainable Development Goals and to the Sendai Framework for Disaster Risk Reduction, and also to the indicators that you're required to report on the national level for the SDG implementation, but also for the implementation of on the Sendai framework. And we included elements that have a stronger linkage and look at the synergies between mitigation and adaptation efforts. We also strongly revised and further progressed on the step of implementing adaptation and on step 6 on monitoring and evaluation, especially related to the experiences that was gained over the last 5 to 7 years of EEA member countries. If you look now at this image, you see 2 different colors and all the EEA member countries. And as you can see on this slide, it shows the adaptation policies, so national adaptation strategies and national adaptation plans or from all EEA member countries. And here you see that all besides one, there's no column of 2020, but also Croatia has a national adaptation strategy. So nearly all EEA member countries have an adaptation strategy in place. And also the number of national adaptation plans has increased significantly, and it has doubled since the publication of the EU adaptation strategy back in 2013. And what's not visible here, it is visible here if you look at those little stars, it's the revision of the national adaptation strategy. And already 11 EA member countries have revised their adaptation strategy, and several more are in the process of doing this. And what you just saw, the table that I showed to you, is visible in this very recent EA report with the title Monitoring and Evaluation of National Adaptation Policies Throughout the Policy Cycle. The link is here. It's also shared with you in the chat. And what are the findings actually of this report? You really see that there was big development and quite a good process on NAP development over the last years. It brings together especially the experience in implementing adaptation, but also in the progress of monitoring, reporting, and evaluation. And it also gives a few thoughts about the future development, and Kati Mattern already mentioned it, the upcoming new reporting requirements related to the Energy Union Governance Regulation. Very briefly, here is some elements of this upcoming report. And what I would like to share with you, because it links back to the adaptation support tool and is very relevant, because throughout all those different steps of the adaptation support tool, you really need to look into and foster participatory approaches, because they are really relevant if you want to build up resilience and increase resilience, and also if you want to increase your adaptive capacity. An essential element is the co-production of knowledge, and there you need strong stakeholder engagement, which is actually very, very relevant for the implementation of your adaptation policy, but also relevant for your monitoring and evaluation. What we identified is that the knowledge base for climate change impacts, vulnerability, and risks has really increased significantly over the last years. Also, public finance has been steered stronger and has increased in adaptation, but we see that still private sector finance is really scarce in adaptation financing. Monitoring, so the documentation of impacts and implemented policies has started, and also that learning loops that further support implementation. And if you think of the previous slide, you've realized that several countries have revised their strategy. So they gained more and more experience in what is working, what is not working, and how to actually modify and further improve their national adaptation policy frameworks. The monitoring also helps and informs about the effectiveness of adaptation implementation, and with an evaluation, you gain more and more in-depth insights, what's working and what's not working. There is quite some progress on tracking the process itself, but less in terms of outcomes and impacts of the policy and actions. Might be, of course, also relevant to a shorter experience in that field, but more and more information is being gained in that direction. Many countries, and this is also visible in the monitoring step, look at different indicators and data, quantitative and qualitative, to use it for monitoring the progress and the process itself. So some call them indicators, others call them criteria. And the relevant part is that for the interpretation and deriving relevant messages, it's really important to sit together with those actors who are taking those indicators or criteria, because they also provide you food for thought on how information can be interpreted or not. If we look at evaluation, it's really a specific and a separate effort that's needed. It's really on putting the emphasis on getting deeper insights into some of the elements and then to further progress on these insights. And especially countries like Finland, Germany, or Switzerland have gained deeper insights here. And with this evaluation and the monitoring information, the adaptation policies have been revised, and more information on the evaluation is being gained. But it's also relevant that this information is being shared on the adaptation support tool. For example, the recent or very recent report from Finland on their evaluation, which I think is something worth looking into, because it's really food for thought for your own national, transnational, or subnational efforts. Nearly my final slide, and this is an example what we have in the report, and it's the example of the Swiss impact model. And what you see here is some elements that are really relevant. First of all, that you need to have some kind of a strategic goal to measure against, because there was experience of some countries that if you don't have those goals, it's impossible to measure against something, no matter what indicator you're using. And this is just the example related to heat wave mortality and well-being in Switzerland. And I'm not going to explain this figure to you, but it just shows that really what are the elements that you need to think about also in your different adaptation measures that you have in your strategy to really have a very sound sound results that you can measure how you're increasing the resilience and how you have increased over time your adaptive capacity. And this actually closes the loop. And here I just want to tell you that really this adaptation support tool brings together this knowledge and the lessons learned over the recent years. It provides you with further resources to information and really aims to further improve also the learning on the adaptation policy cycle on the national level, but like I mentioned at the beginning, also on the transnational and subnational level. And it's really worthwhile to look into it from my point of view. Thank you very much. And with this, I would like to hand over to our colleagues from Bulgaria. Please, Detelina.
Good afternoon, colleagues. It's a great pleasure to participate in the webinar today. I'm Detelina Petrova, and I'm working at the Ministry of Environment and Water in Bulgaria, which is a responsible institution for coordinating the policy-making process. In relation to climate change. At the end of the 2000 National Climate Change Adaptation Strategy and Action Plan, after 3 years of preparation, the document outlined the strategic framework and priorities for adaptation to climate change until 2030. In our work for preparation on the government level, we are supported by the National Coordination and National Expert Council of Climate Change, which includes representatives of the different ministries, agencies, Bulgarian Academy of Science, municipalities, and non-profit organizations with the interest on climate change. So Bulgaria is situated in one of the regions that is particularly vulnerable to climate change and increased frequency of the climate change related extremely events. The most common hydrometeorological and hazards in Bulgaria are extreme precipitation and temperatures, storms, floods, wildfires, landslides, and droughts. Over the past decades in Bulgaria, the frequency and magnitude of the extremely weather events has increased significantly. The last research conducted by the National Institute of Meteorology and Hydrology projects an increase in annual air temperature in Bulgaria of 0.7 to 1.8 degrees by 2020. Even warm temperature are expected by 2050 and 2080, with projected increase of 0.6 to 3.1 and 2.9 to 4.1 degree, respectively. In terms of the expected changes in the rainfall patterns, a reduction in precipitation is likely, leading to a significant reduction of the total weather reservoirs in the century. In this regard, the projections suggest a decrease in precipitation by approximately 10% by 2020, 50% to 2050, and up to 30 to 40% by 2080. In the most climate change scenarios, rainfall during the winter months is likely to increase by the end of the century, but a significant decrease in rainfall during the summer months is expected to offset this increase. Based on the guided principles in strategic implementation, a number of general objectives for climate change adaptation strategy have been developed. The first one is mainstream and integrated climate change adaptation. It includes strengthening the policy and legal framework for adaptation and the integration of the adaptation considerations into existing national and sectoral plans and programs. The second is build institutional capacity of the climate change adaptation, includes expertise, trainings, knowledge bases, monitoring, and research. The third one is to raise awareness on climate change adaptation, which includes enhancing education and public awareness of adaptation-related policy and measures. And the fourth objective is building resilience to climate change adaptation, which includes strengthening the infrastructure and asset management of the protection of the national capitals, which includes water supply infrastructure, energy supply infrastructure, and etc. On this slide, you can see simplified framework of the structures showing how the climate change adaptation strategy and action plan have been developed from the assessment of the climate risk and vulnerabilities for each economic sectors through policy and institutional arrangements based on the strategic and operational objectives, reaching to identification of the adaptation options and implementing to the action plan. The plan outlines in details the activities for each of the sectors, including the necessary financial resources, expected results, and responsible institutions for their implementation. For the first time in Bulgaria, we have a macroeconomic analysis, and the analysis actually assesses the socio-economical consequences of the effect of the climate change. The National Adaptation Strategy covers 9 sectors, which are agriculture, forests, biodiversity and ecosystems, water, energy, transport, urban environment, human health, and tourism. The strategic objectives for each of the sectors are derived from the specific sectoral context and adaptation needs, which actually are addressed in the specific sectoral assessment reports, which are part of the main national adaptation strategy. As an example, you can see on the strategic objectives for sectors as agriculture and water. Actually, here you can see on the figure that the illustration of the risk-based approach applied to identify the different adaptation options in the water sector, divided on the specific systems at natural and managed water system to the entire water system. You can see in the details some of the adaptation options for different water systems. You can find more details in the text of Bulgarian National Adaptation Strategy and Action Plan on the presented link. Actually, the Ministry is coordinating the development of the strategy following the stepwise approach guided by the EU adaptation strategy. Before develop the national strategy, no dedicated national knowledge platform on adaptation was available in Bulgaria. So for preparing the strategy, Ministry used the Climate-ADAPT platform, which has all relevant European information in one place as a starting point for clarifying what the strategy might look like and how to proceed with the process. The Ministry found the Climate-ADAPT a very complex platform, which is particularly helpful during the preparation of the process. But maybe Svetlana Zhekova, who is actually participating in the development of the strategy, could share her experience also. And following my presentation, you saw that we passed through almost all of the steps described in the adaptation support tool, from preparing the ground for adaptation, assessing risk and vulnerability, identified and assessed the adaptation options. But we are currently on the step 5, which are implementing adaptation, and steps 6 for monitoring and evaluation. The adaptation support tool was very useful, that can guide you through all of these steps of the preparation with a lot of information on the national and EU level. If we would like to share that, it will be extremely helpful for us if we could extend a little bit step 6 with the monitoring and evaluation guidance, which is currently not detailed enough as for the other sectors. And if you could develop the indicators, could be much more well explained than now. And also, if you could provide some guidance which will help us to ensure the reporting requirements. So currently, we are on the step 6, based on the adaptation support, monitoring and evaluating. We plan to monitoring, which involves the collection and analysis of the data about implemented activities on the national and municipal level, and we should reporting the national adaptation actions every 2 years, and we will begin from the next one, 2021. Progress in implementation of the measures envisaged in the action plan under the strategy will be assessed in one midterm and one final official report that will be drafted and presented to the Council of Ministers respectively in 2025 and 2031. And in the conclusions, I want to say that risk can be managed and impacts limited if appropriate and timely adaptation measures are taken on time. Thank you for your attention. It will be a pleasure for me to present you the Bulgarian adaptation strategy.
Thank you very much, Detelina. I hope you can all hear me. Thank you for your presentation. If you could, yeah, thank you. I'm starting at the moment which screen I should share. Thank you very much for presenting the experiences of the Bulgarian colleagues by using Climate-ADAPT in general and the adaptation support tool in particular, and also sorry for this technical problem. I hope you can see me and I hope you can also hear me. If not, please let me know. I have already thanked Detelina for her presentation, and I'm very glad in particular that she is helping us to allow also a peer-to-peer learning through this webinar. On one hand, to show how she has used Climate-ADAPT to be better assisted in her policy process, and on the other hand, to show the others how they have done it themselves to develop their adaptation strategy and plan. So I'm opening now a bit ahead of time the questions and answers session. And I'm very glad that you have already during the presentation posted several questions. I would like to ask the presenters, the panelists, to also become visible, to share their videos that they can be seen, and in particular that we can share some presentations as well if needed. And I would like to take the first question here that came up. It's by Adriani Sunudin. I apologize if I do not pronounce it correctly. He or she was asking, what's the ideal time window to apply monitoring schedule for an existing adaptation plan? Is there a different time scale for each scale of area? I think he means governance level, community, country, the whole Europe. I think maybe our expert, Markus Leitner, could answer this question first. If not, Detelina and the other colleagues can add something. Markus, please.
Yeah, sure. So the experience that we have is that from the early phase on, when you're at the stage on assessing your risks and vulnerabilities, you need to think about the indicators, how you're going to monitor them. So it's related to the climate impacts, which could be, for example, hot days or tropical nights or this kind of information. So that's relevant to already think about in this stage of risk and vulnerability assessment. When it comes to adaptation options, it also depends on how your adaptation options are being organized and structured. And what I meant before, and that's where I provided the Swiss example, you need to have a certain goal of an adaptation measure, because if you don't have this specified, it's like in a project, if you don't have a goal to progress to, what are you going to measure? And so there it's really relevant to have this goal and think about the indicator or criteria. We call it in Austria criteria, how to measure against this. Can be quantitative, but also qualitative. And from my point of view, it's independent of the governance level that you are referring to. There are indicators on the urban level from the Covenant of Mayors. I think they have like more than 240 indicators, but it's up to you to select which one to use for your context of your city level, regional level, or maybe national level.
Thank you, Markus. Detelina, you're just beginning in that process, but would you like to add something from your experience, or Svetlana, from your practical experiences?
Maybe I will give the floor to Svetlana Zhekova, who are much more experienced than me, because she actually participating in the preparation of the national adaptation strategy.
Well, thank you, Detelina. I wouldn't say I'm more experienced than you. I'm just in a different, my experience is just on a different level. And it was as part of the team working on the preparation of the Bulgarian strategy. And just to, I don't have much to add to what Markus just said, but just to confirm that we have started to use the tool at the very beginning, and it's extremely important because you can see basically the other countries' experiences by starting using the tool. And particularly on the risk assessment, it's very much depends. it very much depends on the preparation of the ground. So we have first started with the preparation of the ground, picking up the sectors, and then when you go to the assessment of the risks, you can see basically for the different sectors that you have chosen to go ahead with the risk assessment, you can see what are the criteria that have been used, what are the assessment, the risk assessment options that have been used for the different sectors in the other countries, and you see that basically they are not very different. And we have followed this approach, and this is how we have picked up the criteria. Yes, it would be great if you could show it, Markus. I see that you are going to the tools directly.
Thank you very much for sharing your thoughts, Svetlana. I would like to go to the next question since we have limited time. It relates to, I'm sorry, I have to move up on the long list of questions. At what stage could we use the adaptation support tool, even before implementing or at the end? I think this is a question that was already answered during the presentation, that the tool can be used at every stage of adaptation policy and planning. I would like to take the next question, how we can call the private sector to be more implied in adaptation planning, even if they are already prepared for the future. They do not disclose their orientation, whereas they should be part of national strategies. It's a very specific question. It's about stakeholder participation. Markus, maybe you start with saying what the tool provides in this term. It comes from Jeremy Noor-Gray.
Yeah, maybe what I can say to that from my point of view, one, and my colleague Klaus Radenski, which is well known in the UNFCCC and COP context, he was already saying in the early 90s that you need to involve the banks and the whole investment business into this issue, because if it's not arriving at this business side and the banking side and the economic side, it doesn't have an impact. And what you see now recently is the development of the EU taxonomy for the private sector, where you have mitigation and also adaptation as a key element. And there are also reporting requirements for financial sector actors or finance institutions. And on the other hand, what we already saw in the past is the involvement from the insurance industry on the European level, but also on the national level, and the efforts undertaken by Munich Reinsurance or Swiss Re in that direction. So there is some engagement, but we hope that also now the taxonomy and the related implementing acts will have a bigger supporting factor, that adaptation is not only funded by public sector actors.
Thank you very much, Markus. I think this is a very important piece of policy and legislation that you were mentioning, and that will help a lot. I take the next question. It's coming from South Africa, from a local municipality. And Kirina Singh was very much interested in knowing how we have found the level of interest in this from local governments and other units that are not really involved with climate change. For example, coming from wastewater sanitation policy area. So the previous question was in the involvement of the private sector. Now we have a question regarding the involvement of the local communities. Markus or Detelina, if you have experiences with that, please go ahead.
Maybe what we can refer to in this stage is there is also, and I mentioned it at the beginning, the Urban Adaptation Support Tool, which is specifically targeted at city level actors or urban sector. And there are different ways, approaches, also good practice examples, how different private actors, sector activities, but also maybe less active actors on the municipal level can be engaged in the process. And from my experiences, it just takes time. And for you, in order to prepare, you really need to understand or start understanding, learning the language of a sector and understanding the context that the actors are working in. And then you identify the points that you can connect with. So this is, from my experience, really very relevant. Svetlana, okay. Please.
Yes, if I may share the experience from Bulgaria, when basically we got the interest from a local level only after we have worked on the different sectors, risk assessments and vulnerabilities, and on the national level strategy and action plans. Before that, the reaction on a local level was that there was not enough guidance to really go ahead with measures only on a local level. So their reaction was that they needed this guidance on a national level first. And now we can see that that they are getting more and more active on regional and national level. So it helped a lot. And now when we are at this stage already to outreach the local and the regional levels, we are really very grateful to help the local level actors and to guide them through the Climate-ADAPT tool on urban adaptation. It's really very good tool. Yes, you need the national level guidance, but when you get on a local level, I would really encourage everybody to use the urban adaptation tool.
Thank you, Svetlana. We are running out of time. Maybe Markus, if I see that you have the screen at the moment, if you could please show our participants where they can find the Urban Adaptation Support Tool. I think that would be quite helpful to visualize where this can be found.
So what you see here is the Urban Adaptation Support Tool.
I think, Markus, you don't need to explain the tool as such. I think I wanted only to ask you to share where the users of Climate-ADAPT can find that. And as far as I can see, you have used the knowledge tab of the main blue menu bar to easily find it. If you need more specific information at local levels, please use this one. I'm sorry, we have 1 minute left. There are so many interesting questions in the chat, and I apologize for our technical problems, because there were smaller ones that we have not shared the screen on time. Thank you for putting all your questions, for listening, and we will see which way we can find to possibly answer those remaining questions, and would like to encourage you, if you're using the adaptation support tool and you find any problems or you have more questions, please send an email to the generic Climate-ADAPT email address, which was shown by Silvia at the beginning. It is Climate-ADAPT at eea.europa.eu. So thank you very much for your listening, and we are looking forward to the next Climate-ADAPT webinar, which possibly could be on the topic of how to use Climate-ADAPT to support the new EU adaptation strategy in 2021. Thank you very much, and have a nice day and stay healthy.